Your Honor, may I have the podium computer, please? All right. Sir, do you see what's been previously admitted as Government's Exhibit 149 in front of you? Yes. Do you recognize that person? Yes. Who is that? Little Charles. And was he the individual that you identified as being the leader of the Gordy Boys in the late 1990s? Yes. And the Gordy Boys was a faction of the Four Corner Hustlers? Yes. Sir, you also mentioned an individual named Momo, correct? Yes. Do you know what Momo's real name was? No. Do you know if Momo had a relationship with the defendant? Yes. And what was that relationship? His brother. And was Momo in the late 1990s, around 95, 96, a Gordy Boy four-corner hustler? To my knowledge, yes. And was Mr. Span in 95, 96 a Gordy Boy four-corner hustler? To my knowledge, yes. Sir, I'm showing you what's previously been admitted as Government's Exhibit 143. Do you see that? Yes. And who is that? Momo. Sir, you also mentioned someone who went by the name Spiffy? Yes. Was Spiffy a Gordy Boy four-corner hustler in 95, 96? Yes. Do you know Spiffy's real name? No. Sir, I'm showing you Government's Exhibit 128, which has previously been admitted. Do you recognize that person? Yes. And who is that? Spiffy. Sir, you also mentioned someone by the name of LeVar? Yes. Was LeVar a Gordy Boy in 1995 or 1996? Yes. Did LeVar have any nicknames? No. Excuse me? Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked as Government's Exhibit 1134, which has previously been admitted in evidence. Do you see that? Yes. Do you recognize that person? Yes. And who is that? LeVar. And, sir, did you know each of these individuals to be Gordy Boys? Yes. Sir, when was the first time that you met Mr. Span? In the middle 90s? In the middle 90s, you said? Yes. And at that point, when you first met Mr. Span, did you hold the rank of 5-star Universal? Yes. Can you describe the first meeting you had with Mr. Span? He was with Charles. Me and Charles had to meet, and he was with Charles on Charles's security, him and a couple other guys. So Mr. Span was with Charles. Are you having a meeting with Charles? Yes. And Mr. Span was security for Mr. Charles? Yes. And why were you having a meeting with Lil Charles? Because me and Charles had some business arrangement in another neighborhood, and we had an incident over there. We had to come together to see what was going on. So you and Little Charles had a business arrangement in another neighborhood? Yes. And you had a meeting? You had an incident occur in that neighborhood? Yes. What was the business arrangement between you and Little Charles? We were selling narcotics in the North K-Town area. And what area were you selling in? Keeler and Crystal. Is Crystal 1 block north of Division? Yes. And so when you say we were selling, do you mean you individually and Little Charles individually? No. Who do you mean as we? Me and Little Charles had a group of guys selling for us on the corners over there. Were you, did you each have your own set of guys? Yes. And were the guys that were selling for you, were they members of the unknowns? Yes. And were the guys that were selling for little Charles, to your knowledge, were they Gordy boys? To my knowledge. And what were they? What were these individuals selling on near Crystal and Keeler? Heroin. Heroin? Yes. And what was the business arrangement between you and Lil Charles as to the heroin that was being sold near there, near that block? We was going to split the profits. And you said an incident happened? Yes. What was the incident? Some other guys came through and shot at the workers. You said some other guys came through and shot at the workers? Yes. And the workers were the people selling on the block? Yes. Did you come to find out who was shooting at the workers? Yes. Who was that? Another group of guys called the One-Ways. A group of guys called the One-Ways? Yes. What were the One-Ways? A group of guys that all the streets go one way, so they call theyself One-Ways. So was this another gang? Of multiple gangs. It was a group of people from multiple gangs? Yes. Who formed a group called the One-Ways? Yes. So following the One-Ways shooting up the workers on the block near Crystal and Keeler, you and little Charles had a meeting? Yes. And what were you meeting about specifically? So we could try and figure out who had did the shooting over there on Keeler. Did you go by yourself to this meeting? No. Who did you go with? A group of my guys. A group of other unknowns? Yes. And why did you bring other unknowns with you? Because I didn't know what was going on. And did those other unknowns have any particular responsibilities? To protect me. To protect you? Yes. And how were they going to protect you? With arms. With arms? Yes. Were they armed? Yes. With guns? Yes. Did little Charles come to the meeting by himself? No. Did he bring other people with him? Yes. Do you remember who he brought with him? I remember a couple of the guys, yes. Who did he bring with him? He brought Spiffy, LeVar, Jesse, and Brother Man. So little Charles brought Spiffy, LeVar, Jesse, and Brother Man? Yes. And is Brother Man the defendant? Yes. Was Mr. Span walking at the time? Yes. And did you see any of these individuals, Spiffy, Mr. Span, LeVar, or Jesse, carrying firearms? Yes. Who did you see with a firearm? All of them. Did the meeting then actually happen at Crystal and Keeler? In that area, like probably east of that or west of that at Keeler. So within a block or two? Yes. And was there a resolution to the meeting? Yes, we found out who the guys was, and we had mutual friends, and we ended up solving the situation. You solved the situation? Yes. How did you solve the situation? By mutual friends. We ended up having a conversation with them, and they left it alone. Who left it alone? The unknowns? The One-Ways left. Excuse me, the One-Ways? Yes. And were Were you or the other unknowns you were with carrying a particular type of gun that day? I was carrying a MAC-10. And was that MAC-10 of particular interest to anyone that day? Yes. To who? To LeVar and Little Charles. LeVar and Little Charles? Yes. And what, if anything, did you do with that MAC-10? I allowed them to take it with them. And why did you do that? Because I really didn't want to ride with it anyway. I'm sorry? I didn't want to ride back with it anyway. Did you ever get the MAC-10 back? No. Why not? Because during the time I was supposed to get it back from them, Charles ended up getting shot. I'm sorry, sir. Could you say that again? The day I was supposed to get it back, Lil Charles got shot. And who was supposed to bring the gun back to you? Brother man. And did Mr. Span bring the gun back to you? No. Did anyone ask if you wanted the gun back? No. And you never asked for it in return? No. And why didn't you ask for the gun back? Because they had some internal stuff going on with themselves, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And when you say they had some internal stuff going on with themselves, what do you mean? They come to the light that his own Charles' own little guys was the ones who supposedly shot him up. And when you say Charles's own little guys, do you mean other Gordy four-corner hustlers? Yes. Why did you not want to get in the middle of that? Because I met them through him, and we all was cool, so I didn't want to be in the middle of what they had going on. And so when you say met them through him, who's them? All the individuals that was Gordy Fours, I met them through Lil Charles. Were there specific individuals? Brother Man, Spiffy, LeVar, Momo, all of those guys. So you met Bro Man, Spiffy, LeVar, Momo through Little Charles? Yes. And you had a cordial relationship with Bro Man, Spiffy, Momo, and LeVar? Yes. And did you continue to have a cordial relationship with Lil Charles? Yes. In addition to being cordial, did you have a business relationship with Broman, Spiffy, Momo, and LeVar? I had a business relationship with Brother Man, yes. And did you continue to have a business relationship with Lil Charles? Yes. And what was that business relationship? Selling narcotics. So did you continue to interact with both Mr. Span and Lil Charles? Yes. Did you see Mr. Span with Lil Charles after that point? No. Based on your interactions with Mr. Span, did you understand him to be a Gordy boy anymore? No. What about Mr. Span's brother, Momo? No. He was no longer a Gordy boy? No. Did you know Mr. Span to continue to be a four-corner hustler? Yes. Did you know Momo to continue to be a four-corner hustler? Yes. Did you know Momo to belong to another faction of the four-corner hustlers? I can't say that, no. Would you see Mr. Span with Momo after that point? Yes. Would you see him with other four-corner hustlers at that time? Yes. Do you recall who you would see him with? Majority of the time I saw Brother Man. It was him and Pierre together. Pierre, you said? Yes. Did Pierre have any other nicknames? Postman. Your Honor, may I have the podium computer, please? Thank you. Sir, I'm showing you what's previously been entered as Government's Exhibit 106. Do you see that? Yes. Do you recognize that individual? Yes. Who is that? Pierre. Pierre? Yes. And this is the individual you said that also went by the nickname Postman? Yes. And did you know him to have any other nicknames? No. Did you see Mr. Spann with any other Four Corner hustlers in the time after Little Charles was shot? Yes. Who? Spiffy. And Spiffy was the individual that you identified earlier? Yes. So you continued to see Mr. Spann with Spiffy before Little Charles was shot and after Little Charles was shot? Yes. Was there anyone else that you would, any other Four Corner hustlers that you would see Mr. Spann with after Little Charles was shot? Yes, there was multiple members I saw him with, ma'am. And who are those members? Fly Mike. There was different ones, ma'am. I just can't recall at this time. Sure. You said Fly Mike, sir? Yes. Did you ever, after Little Charles was shot, did you ever supply narcotics to Mr. Spann? Yes. How often? A few different times. A few different times? Yes. Was it regularly? No. What time frame during which you would supply narcotics to Mr. Spann? I supplied him right after Charles got shot, and maybe about a couple more times after that. And when did you stop supplying narcotics to Mr. Spann? When I got incarcerated. For which offense? My state case. The state narcotics offense? Yes. And did you continue to supply narcotics to Mr. Spann after you were released from your state offense? Yes. And for about how long? Until I caught my federal offense. And was that your first federal offense? Yes. And, sir, I don't believe I asked you this earlier. Were you arrested for the federal offense in about December 2002? Yes. So up until about December 2002, were you occasionally supplying narcotics to Mr. Spann? Yes. What types of narcotics were you supplying to Mr. Spann? 1 to 2 ounces. You said 1 or 2 ounces? Yes. 1 or 2 ounces of what? Cocaine. And did you know what Mr. Spann was doing with the cocaine? He was selling it on his block. What was Mr. Spann's block? I think it was Lexington and Pulaski, or Polk and Pulaski. Lexington and Pulaski, or Polk and Pulaski? Yes.